So here's our question. Why is growing in humility so difficult? So here's some, just kind of in quick fashion, because I want to get to the solution. So just in quick fashion, just kind of prime the pump a little bit. Here are some things that I think that we see from Scripture and from our own experience about why this idea about humility. And again, we're not talking about being weak or wishy-washy or colorless or a doormat. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about Christ's example of humility, that purposeful, courageous, focused decision to put our own interests aside because we're pursuing God's path. That's what we're talking about. We're following that example of Christ. So why is that so hard? So here's a few things that I thought about. False humility masks pride. And all of us know folks who have, they act so humble, but we know they're really not. Frank, I love this quote from Benjamin Franklin. This is from his autobiography. I had to slip at least one literary thing in here, right, as an English teacher. So here's his quote. In reality, there is perhaps no one of our natural passions so hard to subdue as pride. Disguise it, struggle with it, beat it down, stifle it, mortify it as much as one pleases. It is still alive and will every now and then peep out and show itself. For even if I could conceive that I had completely overcome it, I would probably be proud of my humility. So we know. We know that from the news. We can think of. I was thinking this week about televangelists who had fallen, right? We all remember, many of us in the room remember Tammy Faye with her massive eyelashes, right? And Ted, or Jimmy Swaggart, or Ted Haggard, and these people who, and I'm not making any, I don't mean to make any claim about how they are now, but at the moment they were in the news, it was revealed that what they were projecting was very different than the reality of who they were. I think sometimes that I don't see my own lack of humility. It kind of shows up in this false humility. So I think it can show up in my criticism of others. Because at the base of that, right, when I criticize Lori, who I haven't seen in 25 years, but if I were to criticize Lori, then at the root of that, right, is I do it better. Thus, the way she's doing it is not as good, right? I do it better. I think better. I know better. My kids are better. That's at the root of criticism. It shows up in those, we all do this great in the South. Those kind of innocuous comments about our sister to which we tag, bless her heart. That's right. You knew. Yeah, that's that false humility. Mm-hmm. I think it shows up in me when, this is a different one, but when I overcommit or overschedule or overwork, which I think the attitude behind that is, this is going to fall apart if I don't do it, right? The dinner's never going to get planned. The shower's not going to look right. Nobody else, the Bible class curriculum is going to spin out of control. Or at our work, everything comes down on me. Well, at the base of that is pride. Like, I am responsible for keeping all the plates moving. That's kind of what I'm saying. behind the scenes of that over committing. Or the, I just don't understand why she, ... That's that false humility. Or that false, sometimes we misunderstand humility. It's not groveling. It's not an invitation to be mistreated, overlooked, stepped on. It's not being a martyr. It's not being weak. None of those phrases describe Jesus, right? I mean, we just talked about that. His humility that grew out of the loving, courageous choice to give up what was rightfully his. He was able to serve because he fully understood that he had come from the Father and was returning to the Father. And so he didn't have to hang on to it himself. He could give that up because he knew where he'd come from, where he was going. Our culture doesn't value humility. I don't know if y'all have noticed this or not, but that was sarcastic. We see it. We see it in our obsession with the media, with anything that looks glitzy. It shows up in the way that we, the attitude that we have about winning in competition. Sometimes it shows up in the way we talk about self-esteem to our kids. And I know all of this is so tricky because we don't want, I know it's got to be a balance. We don't want our kids to feel, we also don't want them to have a negative self-esteem, of course. But this idea about what we value, the winners, this is what our culture values, and it makes it hard for us who are, those of us in the room who are Americans, like through and through. Sometimes it's hard for us to reconcile or to bring our what we have grown up believing about winning, about competition, about being the best, about working hard, into this idea of Christ's humility. Humility is costly. I mean, we can look at Jesus' life, right? It cost him everything. His choice cost him his home, his family, ultimately his friends all abandoned him, physical pain, his position. It cost him a lot. And it requires a lot of us, that we put others' needs above our own. It requires extra time, emotional energy, resources, sometimes money. It does cost. And sometimes that's why we hold back. And honestly, we all really just want our own way. You know, at the end of the day, we're generally convinced the way we do things is the right way, and the way we think is the right way to think. I mean, if we don't, we change until we get back to the right way of doing it and the right way of thinking. The most comfortable way, the way it should be done, the way my mom always did it, the way, on and on and on. But if you strip all of that away, what's comfortable, what feels good, what's the right way, so much of that is rooted in, I just want my own way. I mean, we learn to mask it as we grow older better than these, but this is us, just don't mess up my stuff. you know. So here's the scene in Philippi. We've got two women, both Christians, both sincere, apparently, both completely convinced that the other is wrong, and both willing to tear the church apart to defend her own position. And here's the rub. Paul identifies both of these women as disciples who have contended at his side, by my side in the cause of the gospel. So both of them apparently are sincere, faithful, valued followers of Christ. And Paul pleads with the church to help Euodia and Syntyche. If that's not the way you pronounce it, please forgive me. To be of the same mind, and asks the church to help them. It is hard. It's truly hard to honor someone you feel is less worthy or less prepared or not as dedicated or just flat out wrong. To consider the possibility that they also are valued, not a sister in error, but a valued member as precious as you are to the Lord. And this is the situation that Paul speaks into. To this young church, Paul writes, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interest of others. So, Paul's suggestions, when you are faced with this situation, a church that's not getting along, a sister or a brother that you struggle to value or to see their perspective or to put their needs in front of your own, what do you do in that situation? So in Philippians, he has 5 very concrete suggestions. So his first one we've already talked about, and that's to imitate Christ. And that is his key suggestion. Here and in many, many other places is to focus our attention on Christ, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. And that, I wanted to read that again because it is the core of Paul's message to us. Imitate Christ. Fix your eyes on Christ. Here's a second suggestion, and that is to imitate our brothers and sisters who live selflessly. All of us have these people in our life, people that we know who are getting it right. And Paul has 2 suggestions, actually 3. He offers himself to the Philippians as an example of someone who follows Christ, which could sound kind of like, well, that's not a very humble thing to say, but he knows. Remember, we're talking about the way that the kind of humility that Christ demonstrates is the kind of humility who has a clear purpose, and in order to achieve that clear purpose, which is to glorify God and to be obedient to Him, sets aside rights, privileges, needs in order to pursue that. And Paul can honestly say he is doing that imitate me while I do it. He's got two other people that he wants to point out to the Philippians. One of them is Timothy. And Paul writes of Timothy, I have no one else like him who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. For everyone looks out for his own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. Here's another example, as Epaphroditus, who longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor men like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ. So his suggestion, Paul's suggestion, is imitate our brothers and sisters who serve selflessly. If you don't know how to do it, find someone who's doing it and imitate them. So I want to just share with you just a couple of three people who, out of the many, I had a long list of people who I can imitate, who I think are doing it well. But here's I just wanted to really briefly share three, and where we're heading with this in a minute, I'm going to ask you to list some people on your sheet, okay, as a memory jogger for you later. On the left, this young woman's name is Lee, and she's a year older than my oldest boy. So she's to me, she seems like a youngster. She's probably 29 now. And Lee has, when I spent so much time with her, she was probably 25. She had 3 little bitty kids. And her husband was in the police academy and became a policeman. And so raising those 3 kids really fell on Lee. But the thing that was such an encouragement to me about Lee is that she's super smart, super talented, but she found for that period of her life when her children were little, she found so much joy in putting there in really investing herself in those 3 little guys and in supporting her husband. It was truly a model of selflessness. It wasn't because that she didn't have ambition of her own. It wasn't that she didn't have other talents than making, wiping up sticky peanut butter off the counter. It's because she made a choice to put their needs ahead of her own for that period. And that's what it looked like for her. This woman is my niece, Aubrey. Not this woman. I want her to be my niece, but this is my niece too, Aubrey. And Judy's daughter, my sister's daughter. And Aubrey, wow. Y'all need to know Aubrey. She has so many things I could tell you that are admirable about Aubrey. But one thing, because of our time, I could spend the rest of our time talking about Aubrey. But one thing here is that she has found a way and has poured herself into it to support our brothers and sisters that live in Ghana. And over the last 10 years, she has made multiple trips to an orphanage in Ghana. She set up a nonprofit to help them. She thinks and pours energy and her effort into helping people from whom she can receive no tangible benefit back from. This is my mom. Many of you know her. And she has she's another model for me of someone who lives selflessly. And again, there's many things I could say about my mom, but one thing that I want to say right now that is a model for me is that she has my entire life tried to put my dad's needs in front of her own. And wow, what an example of godly living that is. So let's pause for just a minute and do what Paul has encouraged us to do, and that is to consider models of selfless living that can encourage us. So if you would, let's just take about three minutes. Some of you may have already jotted some names down, but on your sheet, if you haven't, try to jot down 2, 3, 4 names of people that you consider, that you think, okay, you're getting this, and I can model my life after yours. As you're finishing that or coming to a pause, you may want to add to that later. I'd also encourage you before you get like swamped back into whatever your weekend tasks are, you might take a minute and shoot the names on your list, shoot them an email or text them or give them a phone call and tell them that they are encouraging you to live like Jesus did. So the question on the table is, what advice does Paul give us for growing in humility? Imitate Christ, imitate our brothers and sisters who are doing it well. His third suggestion is to consider our accomplishments in light of Christ. So here's what he says. Let's see. Oops. Sorry, I'm going back. Don't come to that yet. Okay, here's what he says. If any of you thinks that he has reason to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. In regard to the law, a Pharisee. As for zeal, persecuting the church. As for legalistic righteousness, faultless. So if I were writing this list about my spiritual pedigree, like Paul just did, I might say I'm 3rd generation Church of Christ on both sides. I'm a preacher's kid, and I'm married to a minister. I attended a Christian college. I sent our children to Christian colleges. I spent my college summers doing mission work. A whole year after getting out of college, I took my children to church and youth group activities every time the door was open. I've taught their Bible classes, had small group in our home for years, read the Bible to them at night, prayed before every meal, and I could go on and on. So let's pause for a minute. We're thinking about Paul's encouragement here is to first think about, reveal to ourselves what we kind of think we have going our way as far as our spirituality. So we got to be honest with ourselves. Like, here's what I think I've done right. So would you take a minute? Again, you may have already started that, but take a minute and on question 3, think about if you're really honest with yourself, what do you think that as you look at your life, what do you think you've done right? What would you say is your, like Paul's list, kind of your spiritual pedigree? So just take a couple of minutes and jot down some ideas there. So after considering our accomplishments, and again, we have to get those out on the table and really be honest with ourselves. We place those up against Christ's example. And here's what Paul writes. Whatever was to my profit, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them rubbish, trash, worthless, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ. I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow to attain to the resurrection from the dead. So place our accomplishments, consider our accomplishments in light of Christ. Here's his next suggestion, is that when we consider our brother or sister, we're commanded to follow Paul's example, to concentrate on whatever in his or her life is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whew. So we are, I'm watching our time, and we're not going to take time you may do this while I'm speaking, if you wish. But I would challenge you, if you don't take the time to do it right now, when you get to the privacy of your own home, I need you to think about that person that you find difficult or that angers you or that you don't understand. And to follow, think about a specific person. Be honest with yourself and follow Paul's instruction here to think about and focus our attention on these qualities in that brother or sister that mirror Christ. Here's his other suggestion, or another one that he gives us, is when we think about our brother and sister, that we refuse to be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, to present our requests to God. So, how do we take care of the fussing and the complaining and the ignoring and the disheartenment? We focus on what is excellent and praiseworthy and admirable in our brothers and sisters, and we pray. This is his very specific, concrete instructions. So these take energy and purposefulness, don't they? We can't just choose to ignore the person. That's not going to cut it. We can't choose to ignore or to push to the side segments of our groups of our church. I know all of you have heard these very real concerns about the millennial generation and how they're exiting churches. We can't. It is exactly contrary to what Paul is teaching us here to just say, well, there's nothing I can do about that, or that's sad, but it's on their own head. No. We can't. We have to follow that's Christ's humility, to put their needs ahead of our own, because they are part of Christ's body with us. I think that this teaching here helps explain kind of his strange statement in chapter 1, which we didn't read, but where he talks about the people who are causing him grief when he's in prison, and he says, well, whatever, whether from false motives or true, they're teaching Christ. Remember that in chapter 1? It's always struck me as kind of odd. Like, what? I think he is putting his own advice or his own urging to work in that first chapter. He is maybe considering that he doesn't know the whole story about these people. And so he's going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And that's his model for us too. Here's his last suggestion, is to acknowledge that even our most contentious, bewildering, aggravating brother or sister belongs to Christ and is an essential, treasured part of Christ's body. Both of these sisters, Euodia and Synecdoche, both were precious to Christ. And it's interesting, Paul does not weigh in on their controversy, does he? That is not his point. It's like when our kids were 3 and 4 and they're fussing over they've each got their hand on the Lego piece and are tugging. And our response to them is, you guys work it out. Work it out. Figure it out. You both are, for our boys, you both are part of this family. You're both our treasured sons. No, I'm not going to weigh in on one side or the other. You guys work it out. And Paul is saying that to this church as well. You both belong to Christ. So we all know the comparison to the body imagery from 1 Corinthians. Now the body is not made up of one part but of many. If the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, it wouldn't for that reason cease to be part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has arranged the parts of the body, every one of them, just as he wants them to be. God has combined the members of the body and has given greater honors to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. And I think I frequently like to think of myself as the eye, the most presentable part. But in fact, that may not be the case, and it's beside the point. Each part of the body is treasured by Christ. So I'd like to leave you with this. This is a picture of Henry Nouwen and his friend and teacher, Adam. And, Adam is, Henry Nouwen is a university professor who gave up his position at Harvard to go work at a live-in facility for people who were severely disabled. Here's what he writes about Adam. Adam is the weakest person in our family. He's a 25-year-old man who cannot speak, cannot dress or undress himself, cannot walk alone, cannot eat without much help. He does not laugh or cry. Only occasionally does he make eye contact. His back is distorted. His arm and leg movements are twisted. He suffers from severe epilepsy and despite heavy medication sees few days without grand mal seizures. Sometimes as he grows suddenly rigid, he utters a howling groan. On a few occasions, I've seen one big tear roll down his cheek. Most of my life, speaking of himself, has been built around the idea that my value depends on what I do. I made it through school, I earned my degrees and awards, I made my career. Yes, with many others, I fought my way up a little success, a little popularity, and a little power. But as I sit beside the slow and heavy-breathing Adam, I start to see how violent that journey was, so marked by rivalry and competition, so pervaded with compulsion and obsession, so spotted with moments of suspicion, jealousy, resentment, and revenge. And here's his conclusion. Adam shows us Christ's peace, which is rooted more in being than in doing, and more in the heart than in the mind. It is a peace that calls forth community. At La Ark, this facility, the disabled people hold us together as a family. In fact, the most handicapped people are the true center of gravity. Adam, in his total vulnerability, calls us together as a family. Because of Adam, there's always someone home. Because of Adam, there's a quiet rhythm in the house. Because of Adam, there are words of affection, gentleness, and tenderness. Because of Adam, there is always space for mutual forgiveness and healing. Adam, the weakest among us, is our true peacemaker. How mysterious are God's ways. This is the community, the valuing of every member in our community, regardless of how powerful by world standards or how weak, how young, how old, regardless of whether they are educated or not. The valuing of each member, this is the deep community that Christ calls us into. So how do we conduct ourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel? We follow Jesus' example with all our passion, our energy, into deep community, fueled by love and humility. Thank you very much.